So we're going to dive in. We're going to do a first look at the latest research on donor-advised funds with our extremely special guest, Lisa, who I'll introduce in a moment, of the National Philanthropic Trust. But you are among the first people to see this data. It is incredibly important. Um, I've sort of said this to you before, but meaning you, the broad audience, not all, I may have said this to Lisa too. There are really three things that I think are shaping the next 5 to 10 years in philanthropy. One is the rise of donor-advised funds, and we'll talk a lot more about that. Two is the great wealth transfer that's starting to happen. And we're seeing a lot of organizations have their biggest plan giving year yet in 2024 and seeing more of that coming in 2025. And then third is sort of the rise of AI and how that changes the way we work. And so we are trying to do, among other things, helping you get really smart about those three elements. And this is one of them. So really glad to have sort of some of the smartest minds in the business here today with Lisa, who I'll introduce. And then before I get started, one thing that I realized the other day, having done 120 of these webinars, is that many of you actually don't know how many people are on the call because it's not obvious in the way it is for a Zoom meeting. So just to let other people know, we're closing in on 1,000 people here today. So you'll see a lot of comments in the chat. A lot of people are pumped to see Lisa. That number tends to go up through about 12:10. People join late, which is totally fine. So glad to have you here. Okay, a couple quick housekeeping notes before we get to the fun stuff. This is approved for 1.0 CFRE credits. At the end of the session, we're going to drop a survey in the chat. That's how you certify your participation. You could get audited. We will back you up. You do not get sort of an official certificate today, but we have our notes in the back end. And if you ever get audited, we're here to help. Here's the agenda. We'll do some quick intros, mostly an intro of Lisa. We'll talk about what the data says about donor advised funds. We've done some research. NBT's done some research, so you'll see that. We'll talk about some very practical steps to take before end of year around securing more of these gifts because they are so big and so numerous. And then, of course, we will send you the recording and the slides later today. And yet, someone will still ask about that in 10 minutes. So if you're in the chat, please just help me out and answer that question when someone asks. All right, so intros. Very quickly, my name is Patrick. I'm pictured here alongside my wonderful co-founder, Jenny Shias-Spradling. Jenny lives on the far West Coast up in Seattle. I'm in New York City. We are lucky to be the co-CEOs of FreeWill. FreeWill is, among other things, the largest estate planning company in America. I don't know when that happens. And the biggest plan giving solution, trusted by more than 1,800 nonprofits, featured in the New York Times, named one of the top philanthropists in the world by Town & Country, et cetera, et cetera. So we're just super happy to be here and along for the ride. And I'm personally lucky to be part of a team that is now about 230 people, which is crazy, closing in on $11 billion raised for charity. Many of the nonprofit partners that we have are on the call, so just thank you for everything you do. And our team has more than 4 centuries of combined fundraising experience, so we get to share that with you. And then last thing, before we get into more of the important content, we're so grateful you're here. We try to give away some of our favorite books every week. And one for the new year is Atomic Habits by James Clear. People rave and rave and rave about this book because it's easy to read and extremely practical. Elizabeth says she's already read it. Elizabeth, tell us what your new habits are from it. Andrew has read it. Grace has read it. Kaylee says it's one of her very favorite books. So don't take my word for it, as LeVar Burton would say. So make a note in the survey at the end of the session. Please do not include your address right now, and we'll have that. Okay, so here's Lisa. Lisa is the senior director and the head of U.S. West at the National Philanthropic Trust, one of the great donor advised funds in the United States. Her job, among other things, is to cultivate relationships with financial advisors, which we'll talk about more later. Provide consultative support to help clients achieve philanthropic goals. She is based in the great city of San Francisco. Before this, she was in the Silicon Valley Community Foundation. So Lisa has experience in the community foundation world and in the other part of donor advised funds in sort of the larger national DAFs. This is going to come in handy as we talk about a lot of things. She's been an executive director. She's been in fundraising roles. She's on the board of directors of the Northern California Plan Giving Council. So if you do plan giving and you live in Northern California and you're not in the council, join the council. You can hit up Lisa for information about that. And then Lisa, do you want to talk a little bit about NPT?
Yeah, absolutely. So, and Patrick, I have to say thank you so much for having me. It's so great to be with you all and to be with such a big crowd this morning, or I guess it's not morning everywhere, but morning for me. National Philanthropic Trust, we are the largest independent provider of donor advised funds, founded back in 1996 within a family office. So we spun out very quickly, became our own independent public charity, but that kind of family office ethos remains a big part of our day-to-day work and the culture of our organization. We tend to work with donors who have some more complex needs around their philanthropy, and we built out a suite of services to serve that kind of donor. About $46 billion in assets under management currently, and the most important number, 31 billion in grants out to charities all around the world since 1996. So that's NPT in a nutshell, and we'll talk a little bit more about the work we do as we go through our data today.
Amazing. And then let me just say that NPT has done this report year after year for now 8 years, 7 years,
18 years.
18 years. Okay,
Yeah.
wow. Do you want to talk a little bit about the report? It is so valuable every year, and I know it's an enormous amount of work.
Yeah, an enormous amount of work. It's something that we're really proud to do as a public service to the nonprofit space, to the philanthropy sector. Every year, when NPT puts together our donor advised fund report, we do that by culling the 990s of more than 1,100 donor advised fund sponsors. So really taking a look at the data that is the benchmark, the baseline for all DAF sponsors. We're looking at grants, contributions, assets, and it's kind of the only source among a lot of great DAF data out there that is this kind of baseline. It's showing you the numbers from each and every DAF so that we can have a nice comparison year to year about how the sector is growing.
That's great. And just for one piece of clarity, so we can all align on this, um, Lisa, correct me if I'm wrong, but this data, so the 2024 report reports on the year 2023.
Correct.
Um, and for some people, for many organizations, that year ends on December 31st. And for some organizations, in terms of the data, that ends on uh,
30th.
June 30th. Is that right? I was
Yes,
sort of
that's right.
panicked about how many days were in June, but 30 days are in June. And so you'll see some of this data is basically July 1, 22 to June 30, 2023. And some of the data is January 1, 2023 to December 31st, 2023 as well. Ron says, how to get access to the report. Everyone just hang tight and we will, at the end of the session, we'll collect your email and we will send you the report as well. So
Great.
just stick with us. So a couple of things before we get into the report. A lot of sort of general positive feelings here, which is really great. People are sort of, I think, relieved to have the election over, whether or not your preferred candidate won. A lot of, you're back to like normal beer commercials as opposed to just sort of attack ads for a Senate race. So hopefully that's got you going well. And what else is good news? Sharp increases in terms of how people are feeling about their goals for the year, which is awesome. Now, what's happening? We saw hopefully some pretty good numbers coming in terms of actual giving. We're seeing a rise in stock market performance. And so this is actually the most positive people have been since June, which is great. And we are rooting super hard for you. And hopefully some of the things that Lisa and I will talk about will help you be even more confident hitting your goals and then obviously actually hit your goals because confidence is great. But we need revenue for the impact that you're going to have. All right. So let's talk about the data that we see in DAFs and Lisa, take it away.
Great, great. Well, before we jump into NPT's data, I wanted to share a little bit of a snapshot of the broader philanthropic sector. So what you see here is from Giving USA's annual report, also covering the calendar year 2023. And we saw in this year that while it looked like giving was up overall, when you just look at the raw numbers, when we actually adjust for inflation, we saw a decrease of about 2% in 2023. When you look at the different subsectors of giving, we did see that individual giving was up a bit from the prior year, from 64% to now 67%. Foundations down a little bit. We saw foundation giving at 21% back in 2022, and that fell to 19%. Bequest giving, corporate giving, pretty similar. And as we talk about DAF giving in particular today, the DAF information that the Giving USA report offers gets a little bit confusing, but I want to share that when you think about this chart, Grants from DAFs at community foundations is going to show up in that foundation number. Grants from DAFs at other providers shows up in that individual number, and then grants to DAFs from individuals to any type of donor advised fund also shows up in that individual number. So we'll really dig deeper into the DAF data in particular, and every year Giving USA puts out kind of a sub-report about DAF giving in particular. So we'll see more and more detail about that as far as where the money is flowing in and out from these different types of vehicles to organizations like yours. So DAF giving represents about a total of 8% of all charitable giving. That's about $250 billion that's currently in donor advised funds waiting to be deployed to organizations like yours. So, Patrick, we'll talk about some really practical tips of engaging with these DAF donors, but people often ask me, like, who are all these people who have donor advised funds? These are really very likely the donors who you already know and love. We have seen a really broad range of different types of individuals utilizing DAFs, and a lot of that is coming about because a lot of donor advised funds are removing any type of minimum gift requirement for establishing a donor advised fund. So that's, we're seeing folks establish them at very small amounts. You're kind of everyday donors who might be giving a couple $100s a year to the charities they care about. On the other end of that spectrum, we're seeing some folks move away from starting private foundations in favor of starting DAFs. And that's resulting in DAFs being established in the tens of millions, hundreds of millions of dollars. We know that DAF philanthropists are super active. They're giving on average 20% of their DAF balances annually. And we also know that DAF donors are more likely to engage their family members, giving not only while living, but also in their planning for a succession for the DAF. So how can your organizations engage with these donors? We're going to get into some really practical tips and tools there. I'll remind you that most DAF sponsors, like myself here at NPT, are kind of agnostic. We're really here to be transactional, to get money flowing, to have a great donor experience. So we don't want you to get caught up on thinking, oh, if I just in the chat tell Lisa all the great work that my organization is doing, she's going to tell her donors to come make grants from their DAFs to us. Really, we want to talk to you about how to make it as easy as possible for donors who have DAFs to give to your organizations. And after we jump through some of this data, Patrick and I will share some of those really practical tips.
Yeah, thanks so much. We're going to get to the next slide in a second. But, it occurs to me that about 85% of you know exactly what we're talking about when we talk about DAFs.
Yeah.
And there may be some small portion of you that don't. So let me just give you an extremely short definition of what a donor advised fund, which we're going to call DAF because donor advised fund is a lot of syllables and we've got only so much time. So what is a DAF? A DAF is an account that sort of functions like a standalone charity where I can give money today or I can give stock today and get an immediate tax benefit. Now that money sits in the account, it doesn't directly go to a charity until later I make what's called a grant or I advise on a grant. But in practice, I make a grant to a charity that I care about, and that charity then uses it to feed the homeless, educate folks, protect the environment, whatever it is. So it's sort of when we talk about a donor advised fund, it's a particular account that one person or a couple has, and then they grant out of it. So we can get into the details more if you have questions, but just so everyone's on the same page as to what this is. All right, let's keep diving in. So tell us briefly about the report, and then we'll get into what it actually says.
Yeah, so NPT's 2024 DAF report was released just exactly 1 week ago, last Tuesday, November 12th. We were featured in Forbes, we were featured in a number of publications, including Chronicle of Philanthropy and others. And I think that the philanthropic field kind of eagerly anticipates this data from us each year. As I mentioned, it's the 18th year that we put this report forward, and we are surveying DAF sponsors, not only the big national DAFs like Fidelity Charitable, DAF Giving 360, NPT Vanguard, but also community foundations, also single issue charities like hospitals or university systems that offer donor advised funds. And we're taking a look at Schedule D of all of these 990s so that we can see these really universal data points, as I mentioned, the contributions, the grants, the total number of donor advised funds. And we're here just to offer a snapshot and to really track how this field is growing year after year.
Yeah. And, those of you that have combed through 1990 know how hard it is. So the fact that MBT has come through 1100 to pull this together, we just owe them a lot of gratitude. So thank you so much.
Yeah. Well, so let's dive into some of those really key numbers. First and foremost, DAFs exist to make grants. And so we always like to start with this number, total grant value made from donor advised funds, $54.7 billion in 2023. That was a pretty a minimal increase, about a 1.4, decrease from the prior year. It's the second consecutive year we've seen with grant value over 50 billion, just a little bit of a dip from last year's all-time high. Grant value was 92% higher than the pre-pandemic levels prior to 2019. And so you're seeing this really nice steep curve up and to the right for the most part on this chart. If we could go back another 5 years, we would actually see that grant value has increased 456% over the last decade. So we're seeing tremendous growth in the DAF as a giving vehicle, and donors are being super responsive. They're using their DAFs to provide really sustained support, even despite, some of the tumultuousness of these last few years.
Yeah, that's great. I think one thing to call out, because not everyone has the sort of stock market trends memorized like Lisa and I might. So, 2021 was a banner year for stocks. And that's where you see that really big jump out of 2022. Late 2020 was a strong year. 2022 was a bad year for stocks. And so you actually, to tread water effectively, when the S&P 500 was down about 18% in 2022, is a really big deal. Because basically that's the money that sort of got put in 2022 and then granted out the next year. So just to sort of have that macro background, I think will help out.
Yeah, so grant making from DAFs about flat from the prior year, but I really like this slide. This is really trying to tell the story of grant making from DAFs versus private foundations as a function of the assets that these different types of vehicles hold. So on the right side of the screen, you see private foundations have about $1.5 trillion as their assets. DAFs are quite a bit smaller than that, about 250 billion. But while private foundations have 5 times the assets that DAFs have, they only grant twice as much on an annual basis as DAFs. So a huge amount of grant making coming from private foundations as a function of their asset size. And of course, private foundations sometimes might exist in perpetuity. They might have different goals around their giving, but with that 5% annual payout rate that is required of private foundations, we're seeing the majority of them really hit that 5% mark or be, between 5 and 6%, where with DAFs, for every year NPT has put our report out, we've seen grant making as an average of 20% from all DAFs. So really quite a huge difference between grant making from DAFs versus private foundations.
Yeah, great point.
So next data point, kind of a disappointing one to be frank, but I know Patrick laid out for us kind of what the stock market was doing in 2022 into 2023. And we do see that contributions into donor advised funds, so this is money coming from individuals into their DAF accounts, pretty stark drop in 2023. Contributions were down 21.7% to about $59 billion. Despite this downturn, that was really a response to the market conditions. People aren't feeling wealthy, aren't feeling like this is the year they want to set aside a big chunk of change for philanthropy. We did see this drop. It is still the third highest year on record. So definitely not, the bottom didn't fall out, but we are seeing that folks are contributing when they feel wealthy and they're holding back when they don't.
Yeah. I think Lisa's more in the research and I'm sort of feel a little bit more liberty to prognosticate. Based on the market conditions that you saw at the end of 2023 into 2024, S&P is up considerably this year, was up considerably, especially in the back half of 2023. So it's really important to understand all of those fiscal years that would have dropped, that June 30th deadline, those probably had like significantly worse years. And at some point, Lisa, it'd be worth actually start looking in the 6-month increments, right? Because we can see sort of, apples to apples for each. But my guess is that you'll actually get us back to those 2021, 2022 numbers for 2024 based on the incredible response. And even 2025, as we go into 2025 with a very strong stock market. Of course, none of this is financial advice and no one can predict the market, but
Right.
where we are right now, the trends would really indicate pretty significant shifts there. And I think you
Yeah.
see this in total assets where at the end, the sort of growth hit and that money is yet to be granted out.
Yeah, absolutely. So while folks maybe slowed their giving at the beginning of 2023 because of the stock market growth, slowed their giving into DAFs, we did see as the markets recovered at the end of 2023 that the assets held in the DAFs were growing significantly in response to those market conditions. So about a 10% increase from the prior year, bringing us to 251 billion in assets.
That's right. And just for everyone's clarification, there's only two ways that assets in donor advised funds grow. One is you put more in. Two is the assets that are already there grow, usually
Yeah.
because the stock market appreciates. So a lot of this money is in mutual funds. That's sort of is that right? Is that the most typical investment within a index funds or mutual funds? Is that the right investment within a DAF?
Yeah, we see a broad range, but lots of mutual funds, index funds, ETFs, kind of the things you might select on your 401k or your 403b offering, those are going to be some of the similar offerings that you'll see as investment options for DAF.
Yeah. So that's a little sense of this. You'll see things up and down. You see at the end of 2022, that actually decreased. Why that decreased? Not because people stopped putting money in, because the stock market really brought that down.
That's
And so
right.
that contributes. There's sort of less money at the dawn of 2023 to then get granted out, which is why you see that treading water is so important. And now you see as we go into 2024, again, obviously calendar in the report, we're obviously deeply there now, we should expect a very strong 2024. We're already seeing it. Lisa, I don't know that we've chatted about this, but we chatted with one provider who in their data saw a 30% gain year over year compared to last year for sort of roughly the same period. So pretty cool there.
Yeah.
But we'll see. No predictions there.
Yeah, well, and just to wrap up, just a couple more data points to share. Number of DAF accounts, it's remaining pretty steady, 1.78 million accounts, a slight increase from the prior year. We did see something that we track a lot in our donor advice fund report is the establishment of new donor advice fund providers and also some shifts. For instance, there were a few large-scale workplace giving DAFs that consolidated, closed some accounts in the prior year. So that really helps us understand that why things look a little bit flat, we did have some of these accounts close in these workplace giving models, where of course in kind of your more standard DAF accounts, every provider saw new accounts opening at a significant pace in 2023.
Yeah, that's right. We don't have data on this, but my guess is that the average size of the accounts that closed was quite small. And in some cases, you actually had large tech companies were some of the folks that were giving these as a workplace benefit. And there were actually pretty sizable layoffs in 2022 at those places. So those accounts sort of definitionally closed. So hope that helps.
Yeah. And then payout rate, really important point. Over 20% for every year that NPT has studied this data. We were just a tiny drop from the prior year, 23.9%, but still seeing, really some tremendous growth and tremendous activity within donor advised funds. Well above the rate from private foundations, as we talked about before, and really, it's wonderful to see that folks, even despite the tougher economic environment of early 2023, are still making grants out the door to support the charities that they care about. It's providing this really nice sustainable source of funding for organizations like yours.
Yeah, great point. And I think, this allows us to do some basic math here, right? So we expect, okay, on average, looking across the board, somewhere between a 22 and 29%, probably more like 24% payout rate. So now you can look at, we've got $250 billion at the dawn of 2024. What's a 24, 25% payout rate on that? Should have done the math before I made that comment, but it's about 62 and a half, 63, $64 billion. I mean, really sizable gifts if that 25% payout rate continues. And by the way, one thing that's happening through the course of 2024 is that 250 that ended up that way has been growing and growing and growing. So it wouldn't surprise me if there was $270, $280 billion sitting in DAFs right now, as well as record grant amounts. So generally quite strong.
Yes, and then so last data point here, average DAF account size, we saw an increase. We're at about $141,000 as the average DAF account size. Some of that does have to do with those account closures that happen that kind of brought up the average DAF account size. But these really remain this great vehicle for giving. You know, when you have donors who might be giving to your organization from a DAF, it's important to know that, hey, they might only be supporting you with $100, $250. On average, they could have $141,000 in that DAF account, and it makes them a great prospect for major gifts and for more engagement.
Yeah, that's a great point. So let's talk about for a moment why this is happening. And I've got a couple of bullet points I want to list out, and Lisa, we can chat more about it.
Yeah.
But so often people in the fundraising space say, "Wow, DAFs are just happening," and we don't sort of get our little detective hats on and sort of understand why, right? I mean, we just showed you astronomical growth since 2017, and certainly before that, and all these things happen for a reason. So what's leading DAFs to charge ahead as anthropomorphized by this? That's not the right word, but made clear by this picture of a tiger. So the big thing, right, when we actually see the growth in donor advised funds, there are donor advised funds at community foundations. There are some single issue donor advised funds, which we won't talk much about today. And then there are these sort of national donor advised funds. And most of the growth in donor advised funds is coming from the national DAFs. And why is that? It's largely because they work so well with financial advisors. And financial advisors are sitting on managing all of the funds for so many of these upper class folks, middle class, upper middle class. And if you are a financial advisor, it's hard. It's a hard job. And because it sort of feels a little bit like you risk being the same as everybody else. And so financial advisors are always looking to provide more value, whether it's helping you with sort of set you up with a tax expert, or helping you with estate planning, or in this case, helping you with philanthropic giving. And so the financial advisors are helping to set up a lot of these accounts. And then they're also saying, hey, this stock is really high at the end of the year. You could save on taxes and give it out over the next 2 years if you put that stock in there and avoided capital gains. And in fact, donor advised funds are excellent at embracing non-cash giving. And those of you that have been to more than one of these sessions know how important that is for any charity. And so it's emblematic of the growth of non-cash gifts that the folks that are embracing non-cash gifts the most are growing the fastest. And so, Lisa, like, what percentage of assets or money going in to NPT accounts is not cash?
So about 60% is not
60.
cash. About
Yeah.
60%, maybe 50 of that is publicly traded securities. A nice leap of 10% are more complex assets that maybe not every charity is equipped to accept directly, like private business interest, private equity, hedge fund interest, cryptocurrency. That's actually a big part of my day-to-day work, is helping donors through those more complex gifts. And I do feel like in a lot of cases, but for being able to give those gifts to a donor advised fund, those might have been assets that would not ever get to charity. So really the non-cash assets play a huge role in increasing the number of dollars available to get out the door to go do good.
Yeah, this is a really important point. And, at some point, FreeWill releases a stock giving report every year. And a couple of years back, we said, we expect that stock giving is going to go down to charities because people are giving their stock to donor advised funds and then liquidating it in the donor advised funds and then sending cash out. And what's happening is the opposite. As people give more stock to donor advised funds, they're also realizing that the benefits of giving stock is enormous. I can avoid my capital gains taxes and I get a full deduction if I've held it for more than a year. And so now I'm giving stock to my donor advised fund and I'm giving stock directly to charity. And the donor advised funds have really helped educate the donor class on that this is a really good way to give. So it's that's sort of one big side benefit that I don't think a lot of people know about. All right. So thank you so much. We're gonna dive more into that in a bit. But FreeWill's simultaneously done a bunch of research as well as NPT, and really to understand from the nonprofit perspective what's going on here. How are nonprofits engaging with this tsunami of donor advised funds over the last 8 years? So when we look at, compared to previous years, 56% of organizations are actively soliciting or promoting DAF giving. This is a big shift. When we look at it from 2023, it was only 46%. So again, it's 54%, 56% now, up from 46%. So a 10% jump in a single year is a really big deal for an industry that might not always move the fastest. Sorry, but it's true. And so you sort of really see people catch up. And we've seen from our own research that people that are asking for donor advised fund gifts 2, 3, 4 times are so much more likely to actually get these gifts. And this is a really important component. When we asked you what kind of non-cash gifts are you getting, donor advised funds and stock gifts, again, stock gifts are on the rise as well as DAFs. Those sort of tied for first. And then third is qualified charitable distributions. This is another one of the fastest rising types of gifts. These are from older donors. So if you're over 70 and a half, you can give right out of your IRA for a bunch of tax benefits that we won't cover today, but just know that it's a really important type of giving. We'll dive in there. Nonprofits believe, I think correctly, that 2024 will be a bigger year for DAF giving. In fact, only 1%. And I think those people are just generally pessimists. Only 1% suggested that they think it's going to be a decrease from a previous year. 64% said they expect an increase this calendar year, and 35% said about the same. The other thing when we look at challenges here, the number one challenge that people have is, hey, I don't know which of my donors has a DAF. Now, other questions like, I don't know how to ask, I get too many anonymous gifts, I have trouble processing them. Important, but smaller. We don't know who has a DAF. 72% named it as one of their biggest challenges. So this is a huge deal. And so some people say, well, can't I just go to NPT and talk about how great my organization is? And I would tell you, you don't go to sort of Wells Fargo and say, there's so much money in bank accounts. Can I just talk to you about how great I am? It's really a holding entity. It's a technology used to sort of hold and get tax advantages in a way that will ultimately benefit charities. And so the people that have donor advised funds are the people who are already in your email list. They're already your donors, right? The folks, there's no sort of magic other group. So the key here is we start asking for donor advised fund gifts. And the number one way to identify a donor advised fund holder is to get a donor advised fund grant from that person, and then you can automatically steward them as well. Lisa talked about this a little bit. So for some of these more complex gifts, real estate, business interests, weird crypto coins, a lot of organizations are taking some of the mainstream crypto these days, but there can be some niche stuff, or there's Lisa, what's the sort of wackiest thing that you had to process in your donor
We
advised?
see a handful of like tangible personal property gifts every year. Like my colleague, who's also based here in San Francisco, worked on a gift of antique violin bows, each worth $1 million a piece, and having to, get those in the door, get them auctioned off and liquidated so that money is now able to flow from their DAFs to go support music organizations and other things that this donor wants to support. Artwork, real estate, all kinds of stuff. So really things that it's probably not always worth your organization's, staffing up to be able to do that yourself when you don't know how many of those gifts might come in the door. But groups like NPT, Fidelity Charitable, Charitable Solutions LLC, there are a lot of DAF providers who can help facilitate these more complex gifts that your organization doesn't want to take directly.
Totally. And I've heard, of organizations getting gifts of livestock, of
Sure.
getting highly valuable collections of erotic art that they had no idea what to do with, all of these things, right? So it's sort of crazy stories across the board, and DAFs can help sort of liquidate it in a very helpful way. 95% of organizations see this. What a remarkable jump from 67% just last year. And so people are really getting their heads around what DAFs can be used for. Sarah Whelan chimes in, says, we are the erotic art story. Yeah, Sarah, I think I might have heard that from you back in the day. So I'm glad you're here to verify that I didn't just make this up on the spot. Okay, trend number 5. Nonprofits will increasingly prioritize DAFs in 2025. More than 50% of respondents consider getting more DAF gifts one of the very highest priorities or a high priority, proven out by the number of people here today. 42% said that getting more DAF gifts was a high or their highest priority for 2024. So going backwards, right? So you're seeing this big jump and even farther increase in prioritization across the board for 2025. This is the right move. As Lisa said, there's at least $250 billion sitting in it. Maybe that number is more like 280 at the start of the year or 270 based on the stock market growth. And so we're going to see enormous sums coming out. Would be curious if anyone in the chat knows, are they seeing more DAF gifts and sort of more money raised to date compared to last year? That would be, it'd be quite helpful to get your take on that as well. Other things to know, national DAFs are becoming more popular than expected. So fundraisers hold a slightly more favorable view of national DAFs than community foundations. 82% of surveyed fundraisers hold a favorable or very favorable view of national DAFs, and 81% of community foundations. This is probably within a rounding error of survey, but it's close. Community foundations, I think, by the way, tend to have higher fees. It's my take that community foundations can do a better job of talking about all the services they provide as opposed to just liquidating it. It's sort of a different, one's a philanthropic advisor, the other is sort of really just financial technology, which is really important technology for you then to go out and make your own decisions. So
yeah, we think about DAF sponsors as being kind of on a spectrum from like transactional to relational. And so very often community foundations are going to be more on that relational side. You kind of get what you pay for. You're getting advice about the local community and where your dollars can go do good.
yeah. And Lisa, you've done both of these things. So
Yeah.
you've really seen both sides of the coin. Really helpful. There's this question, people say, how do you get more relations with the advisors? The really important thing is to get relations with your donors.
Yeah.
The advisors work for your donors, right? And so for the most part, the more you're getting out in front of the community, the more you're getting out in front of your donors and sharing that people can give out of a donor advised fund, the better. One thing I like to remind people of is, you're here because donor advised funds are new to you, and this is a professional fundraising community. So imagine for your donor who might be 50 or 60 or 70, and they've only had a donor advised fund for 3 years. There's still a lot of opportunity here to shape behavior. All right, let's go through a couple more things because we have so much to talk about that we might run out of time. Again, we have sort of generally more, we'll skip this, but generally favorable views of community foundations as well. Okay, so we know that donor advised funds are on the rise. We know there is an enormous $250 billion sitting in donor advised funds, money that cannot go anywhere but to a charitable organization. It can't go back. It doesn't matter if times get tough and you need to buy a car, you need to pay for college. That money is gone. That money is locked away and has to be given to charity. So $250 billion. How do we get access to some of it, especially over the next 40-something days before end of year? Couple quick things. First thing is we absolutely want to check our donate pages. It is a travesty when someone gives you $30 because you ask them for $30 and they actually had a donor advised fund. And if you had asked for a donor advised fund gift, they might have given you $30,000 or $3,000, right? This is a thing that you might not know happens, but it's a huge loss for your organization every time. Here's an example of our friends at the International Campaign for Tibet who do amazing human rights work. And you can see at the top of the page, it gives other ways to donate. And then, of course, you can always still give cash. People ask, does this distract or does this take away from conversion rates? The answer is no. We have seen no evidence of this. And what it will do is raise your average gift. And by the way, when you remind people of their assets, you actually increase the value of their cash gifts as well. So it's a win-win across the board.
Patrick, let me jump
Yes.
in on that. Please, please, please add your EIN to that donate page on your website. Because for most DAF donors, they're going online to a portal to search for a charity to make a grant to, and searching by EIN is the best way to do that. So please, please, please put it on every, at the footer of every page of your website. That is going to make it so much easier for DAF donors to support your organization.
Yes. And this is extra important, by the way, if you are a St. Mary's school, if you are a Main Street Alliance, if you are something where there may be 100 organizations with a very similar name. If you're a United Way or a Habitat or a Boys and Girls Club where you want to make sure it goes to your local and not one of the other ones, please, please, please do this. Okay, one of the groups that you should be targeting that you are probably not is go make a list of your ex-board members. Go find the longest standing person in your organization, make them write it down, go through previous annual reports if you need to. These people fit the demographic, psychographic, and behavioral trends of DAF donors. Call them up. Here's what you can say. How are you doing? We're really trying to see, we're learning a lot about donor advised funds. Do you have one? Have you considered giving out of that? A really good avenue to do it. Step 3, as a reminder, there's 84 trillion, capital T trillion, in wealth that will be passed on over the next 20 years as part of the Great Wealth Transfer. Remember, one of three massive trends affecting philanthropy. And some of this is going to donor advised funds. So as we think about this, we want to have a chance to allocate the donor advised funds to the charity. Lisa, you've spent some time talking with individual donors about this. What are the tips that you have?
Yeah, I would say, we see that 84 trillion is going to be passed by 2045. That's already starting. It's not like going to start soon. We know that by 2026, 150 billion is going to be passing down. So donors who have DAFs are such a great prospect for your legacy society, for a legacy conversation. Most donors who have DAFs put in place a succession plan for their DAF. That could include naming their adult children to be the successor advisors to the DAF, but it also could include a list of charitable beneficiaries who will just receive an outright grant upon their passing. Have that conversation with your donors. Hey, have you ever considered including our organization as a part of your legacy plan for your DAF? These DAF donors have had these conversations with their financial advisors, with the DAF sponsor. They are perfect suspects for this legacy conversation.
Yes, exactly. Do you want to share more about this?
Yeah, I often like to highlight the simplicity of DAFs. It's a turnkey solution. We've talked about that DAFs are able to receive complex gifts, but also just cash and publicly traded securities. Donors who have DAFs have been doing this planning. They've had advice from financial advisors, from the DAF sponsor. They are the perfect, prospect for you to have these deeper conversations about engaging their family in giving. Very often, adult children might be named what's sometimes called a secondary advisor to a DAF, where maybe they let their kids make some grants from the DAF. Ask questions to your donors about that. Ask your donors how they're thinking about the legacy of their donor advised fund. They are really primed for these types of conversations.
Yeah, that's great. And those of you that are sort of wiser about planned giving, also just a reminder, folks who don't have kids and or never married, no kids, tend to be your very top prospects for potentially the entire DAF being left to you. Um, uh, Lisa, we'll go past this and come
Yeah,
back.
let's do.
I think when you're asking about beneficiary designations, a lot of people always say, like, I don't really know what to say. So here's what to say. We put a lot of work in, we wrote it for you. Um, So one example language you can use is, one thing I've seen is that many donors forget to add beneficiary designations. You may have already thought of this, but just in case I want to raise it, would you like me to talk you through some of the options? One of the things you can do that's really gentle here is talk about things that other people might not know, but you probably know. It gives the donor a lot of credit for being smart, but still opens the door to that conversation. So this can be quite useful. We also want to ask donors about matching gifts. So another thing that not a lot of people know about donor advised funds is that some employers match grants out of donor advised funds. They very rarely match money into donor advised funds. So some example language you can use here is, thank you so much for your grant. You may already know this, again, the sort of very gentle language, but many of our supporters don't realize that they can get their donor advised fund gift matched by their employer. Does your employer do matching gifts? And then you can follow up with any documentation necessary to get that gift. Also, my colleague Phoebe worked really hard on this deck, and I just want to compliment Phoebe for the sort of pair giraffes as the picture for matching gifts. Phoebe, thank you so much for all you do, but especially the giraffes today. Step 5, the magic sentence. This is a really important component for all of your emails. So go look through all of your end of year emails and figure out whether the sentence is in there or not. And if it's not, add it. I promise you, it will make your life a lot better. So whatever your ask is, will you chip in today to support animal shelters, universities, museums, hospitals, international development, whatever? And then you add this sentence afterwards. Note, many people choose to give from their assets, stock gifts from their IRA, cryptocurrency, grants from their donor advised funds to see even larger tax savings. What do we do here? One, we remind people of their assets. So even if they give cash, they're likely to give more. 2, we point them in the ways that are going to result in significantly larger gifts. And 3, we remind them of the tax benefits. Now, you might say donors tell us that tax savings don't matter. The evidence is actually not, that's not true. Tax gifts really incentivize how much, or tax benefits incentivize how much people will give and how they give. And so it's a way to get significantly larger gifts. And so we hope that you'll land some transformational stock gifts or enormous grants from donor advised funds using this. This is a really big benefit. And of course, it will increase your cash gifts as well. So please, this is like a cheap and easy way to hit your goals. So no excuses not to do that.
And Patrick, one tip I want to add as we're getting towards the end here, usually when I give a presentation like this in a room, I ask people to raise their hand to say, who here has a DAF themselves? And in rooms of very sophisticated fundraisers, there's usually just a handful of people. And, I have a DAF. I'm glad, Patrick, you raised your hand.
Yeah.
I would encourage people, get a DAF. There's so many providers that don't have a minimum gift requirement. Put a couple $100 in there, see what it's like to recommend a grant to your organization. What's the donor experience like? And how can you make sure that it's a good one for any donor who wants to give to you from a DAF?
Yeah, this is great. John says it. Sarah has, Evelina has one. Jane Schmitt, no relation, I think, has a DAF. Rhonda, Melinda, other folks as well. So good to see that. All right, it's already 12:51, which is wild. So we will do a couple of quick hits. One is, my colleague Phoebe, the aforementioned amazing Phoebe, is, let me just make some, is just dropped a link in the chat. So if you see that little chat button, click on it right now, and click on that link. And he says, we need to meet Phoebe. We'll make sure Phoebe gets a appearance on a future session. So click on that link. Couple really big things in that link. One is the chance to win Atomic Habits by James Clear, an easy, proven way to build good habits and break bad ones. You've already seen in the chat how life-changing this has been for other people. So if you actually have New Year's resolutions and you would like them to stick, this is a great thing to read over the holidays to get you rolling. Make a note in the survey. Please, again, include your address so we know where to send it. Sometimes people don't do that, and it's very hard. We don't really want to just be tracking you down. Second thing, on Thursday at noon Eastern, 9 Pacific, 47 hours from right now, we are going to do a session on donor education strategy with Plan Giving microsite. So this is a little bit more about some of what FreeWill does, but if you're interested in being able to provide more information to your donors about DAF giving, stock grants, as well as a lot of plan giving, and you like things that are beautiful, come check this out. Probably be about half an hour, very casual. So come join us there. Feel free to eat lunch or breakfast if you're on the West Coast while you do it. But coming out with us, we'd love to have you here. And then, yeah, so survey is there. We don't have a ton of time for questions. Instead, we're gonna wrap up a minute early just to give everyone a break before their next session. But we will read all the questions, and we will incorporate into a future webinar. Lisa, how can people reach you before we?
Happy for folks to reach out to me directly. Let me drop my email address in the chat, lbar@nptrust.org. nptrust.org is our website where you can find a really nice kind of interactive online version of our 2024 DAF report. So dig in. There's also a technical appendix. There's all kinds of nerdy stuff you can really get into. So would love for folks to reach out with any questions and take a look at the DAF report online.
That's right. And if you click that link, a couple other things in there. One is you'll get an access to the report, right? To the atomic habits that we talked about. 3 is if you're someone who writes grants as part of their job, we would encourage you to take a look at Grant Assistant and learn some more about that tech. And then there's a bunch of other FreeWill tools if you are someone for whom plan giving is part of your job. And by the way, we get a lot of questions about this. The plan giving tools and the microsites are available only in the United States. There's a bunch of sort of specific legal work that makes them not as useful for our dear friends in Canada and South Africa and the Philippines, et cetera. But the grant tools actually work worldwide. So I know that Canadians have been impatient with us for about 8 years now as we have given them nothing to use. But this month is the month. Those of you in Mexico, happy Revolution Day yesterday. So I hope you had a great Revolution Day. Okay, for those of you that can't get enough content in terms of how we structure our fundraising to hit our goals going forward, in a few weeks, so we're skipping Thanksgiving week and we're skipping Giving Tuesday to give you a little bit of time to nail that. And on December 12th at noon, it's again a Tuesday, some of you have heard we recently had an election. And so we're going to dive into what the election results mean for the state of giving in 2025. So you have some shifts in power. What does that mean? It probably means some shifts in legislation, potentially tax legislation. That is going to inform giving strategy. We also know what happens after an election for organizations aligned with the winning party, aligned with the losing party. We'll look at some historic trends on what happens there. We'll look at how donors are reacting and what it means for a donor who's given a lot of political contributions. How will they give at end of year? So a lot of stuff to dive in on there. Some really interesting stuff that's sort of, as the world is shaping as we speak. And so we'll keep an eye. We'll update that up until the day of the webinar because we're seeing different potential policy proposals coming out of the administration, et cetera. So come join us there. Come see us on Thursday if you're interested. Read the whole report. It's very readable for a report put out by a financial institution. It's like delightful, actually. And I've never seen another financial institution report that is remotely as fun. And so please take a look at that. And then last thing is, please, if you don't mind, just join me in thanking Lisa for joining. It's been such a pleasure to have you. We're deeply grateful for the hour you spent with us. We're also super grateful for the 1,100 990s y'all poured through and all the hard work that basically, I think you started working on this like 5 months ago, and it just
Oh
came
yeah,
out.
it's a year-round effort. We've got great independent statisticians who work on that with us. It's not me, just to say that, but really, Patrick, thank you so much for having me, and Phoebe for all your work coordinating too. It's so great to get to meet you all and meet all of your great followers. So appreciate the time very much.
Yeah, it is a great point. And so, Lisa gets to stand on the shoulders of giants when she comes
Yes.
here with the whole NPT team. So please thank them in the same way that, I'm deeply grateful for not just Phoebe, although especially Phoebe and the entire FreeWill team who helps put this together. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful rest of your week. I will see many of you on Thursday. And until then, hope you are enjoying fall weather and everything that comes with it, and look forward to seeing you again soon.